Lyra drifted through the wide, polished corridors of the Eos Vanguard, her multi-limbed form almost gliding above the smooth metal floor. She had been assigned to observe human behavior, but wandering the ship alone was not part of her official orders. Her curiosity, as always, outweighed her sense of caution. The walls of the vessel reflected soft blue lights, and the hum of the engines vibrated gently through her limbs, a constant reminder of the enormous power contained within this human-built machine. She turned a corner and found herself in a narrow hallway she didn't recognize. Panels blinked softly with unknown symbols, and doors with strange locks lined the walls. She was fascinated by the human's tendency to blend technology with personal spaces. Some doors were labeled with symbols she didn't understand, but one in particular caught her attention. A symbol of a small ship over a circular planet. Perhaps this was the pilot's room. Without thinking, Lyra pushed the door open. She had expected it to be locked, but the human mechanisms were simple enough for her to bypass without triggering alarms. As the door slid open, she froze. The room was small but filled with fascinating details. Screens glowed softly, showing moving maps of stars she didn't recognize. Charts and schematics were spread over a desk, some pinned to the walls with little clips. There was a worn chair near the window, a few personal trinkets scattered around, and a mug with some strange markings that seemed important to the human who owned it. Lyra stepped inside cautiously. She didn't know why she felt drawn to this space. There was something about it, something human, that called to her curiosity. Her claws hovered over a holographic display, and as she touched it lightly, the star map flickered, responding to her presence. She marveled at the precision. Humans were known for their creativity, but seeing it so intimately in a room like this was entirely different. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, and Lyra's instincts screamed at her to leave. She hesitated, torn between the fear of being caught and the desire to understand. The door creaked as it moved slightly under her weight, and then the human returned. Elias, the pilot, walked in briskly, carrying a small data pad. He froze when he saw her. His eyes widened, but not in fear. There was a spark of curiosity, maybe even amusement. Lyra expected him to shout to demand that she leave, but instead he simply studied her silently. "You're not supposed to be here," he said finally, his voice calm but firm. Lyra tilted her head. She could have explained herself, but the words felt awkward. Instead she said, "I am curious. Your work is remarkable." Her syntax was halting, a small flaw in her otherwise precise communication. Elias blinked, then chuckled softly. "You mean the maps and charts?" "It's just my job," she shook her head. "No. The way you arrange it—" "The way you plan. It is different. Clever." Something in her tone caught his attention. Humans were rarely described as clever by outsiders. More often, they were underestimated. He leaned against the desk, studying her. "Clever, huh? Most people just follow protocols. I improvise." Lyra stepped closer, her movements careful and deliberate. She reached out to one of the floating charts. "Improvisation? Human trait?" Elias smirked. "Maybe, or maybe it's just something I do because I have to. Rules don't always make sense." For a moment, the two of them just looked at the maps, the charts, and the stars beyond the window. Lyra realized she had never felt so intrigued. Humans were unpredictable, and yet there was logic in their unpredictability. She wanted to understand it, to study it, to experience it. "You study humans," Elias said finally, as if reading her thoughts. Lyra nodded, assigned to observe. "But this is more." She gestured at the room. "Your mind, your methods." Elias laughed softly. "Well, it's a messy place, but you're welcome to look. Just don't touch the controls too much." Lyra tilted her head again, a motion of both curiosity and agreement. She realized then that she didn't want to leave. The human pilot's room was not just a room. It was a window into the mind of someone who could think differently, who could see solutions where others saw problems. And in that moment, she made a silent decision. She would stay, at least for a little while. Outside, the corridors of the ship continued their hum and flicker. But inside this small, cluttered room, Lyra felt something she had never expected. Fascination, admiration, and an unspoken bond forming with the human who had unwittingly invited her curiosity. For the first time, she understood that some discoveries weren't about maps or stars. They were about the minds that could navigate them. And so, Lyra did not leave. Lyra stayed in the room long after Elias had returned to his work. She moved quietly, examining the displays and charts with careful attention. Each line, each calculation seemed to carry meaning beyond its numbers. Humans, she realized, had a way of thinking that was different from her own species. More flexible, more daring, and somehow full of surprises. Elias watched her from across the room, leaning against the edge of his desk. He was not annoyed. On the contrary, he found her presence interesting. Most visitors or diplomats were formal, cautious, and polite, keeping their distance from his personal space. Lyra, however, did none of that. She explored freely, asking questions not just about the ship but about him. "Why do you do it this way?" she asked suddenly, pointing to a complex diagram of the ship's flight paths. Elias moved closer to the display. "Which part?" he asked, curious now. "The curve here," she said, her three eyes focusing on a specific trajectory. "It seems unusual. Less efficient, but faster?" He smiled faintly. "Exactly. Most pilots follow the standard protocol. It's safe, predictable, but I take calculated risks. Humans think in ways that sometimes the rules can't cover." Lyra tilted her head. "Calculated. Risk. Intriguing. You rely on instinct, not only logic." "Yes," he admitted. "Part of it is instinct, part is experience. You learn to read the stars, read the ship, read yourself. You can't always follow instructions and expect the best result." Lyra moved closer, studying the diagram. "Your methods? Human uniqueness?" Elias shrugged. "Maybe, or maybe it's just how we survive. Sometimes you need to think differently, or you don't survive at all." She was fascinated. Survival, instinct, creativity. These were qualities that seemed to drive humans in ways no other species she had met could replicate. She wanted to understand this better. She wanted to see it in action. "Can I observe more?" she asked, her voice soft but insistent. Elias raised an eyebrow. "Observe more?" "Your work, your piloting, your methods," she clarified. "It is enlightening." Elias laughed, a sound warm and genuine. "You really want to see me in action?" Lyra nodded. "Yes, it is. Different. Inspiring." He studied her for a moment, then gestured toward the holographic star map. "Fine, but you have to promise not to interfere." "I promise," she said solemnly. Over the next few days, Lyra returned to his room whenever she could, carefully avoiding attention. Each time she learned more about the human way of thinking. She watched as he simulated emergency scenarios, adjusted flight paths in real time, and made decisions in seconds that would have taken other species hours to calculate. His mind moved like lightning, but always with purpose. Elias began to notice small changes in the ship's efficiency. Minor course corrections, subtle improvements in fuel consumption, faster route calculations, things he hadn't programmed. At first, he assumed the ship's AI was responsible, but soon he realized that someone or something was studying his work closely. One evening, as they both stared at the star map, Lyra spoke softly. "Your mind, it is adaptable, creative, human mind. Remarkable," Elias chuckled. "You really are obsessed, aren't you?" "Curiosity cannot be ignored," she replied. Elias leaned back, watching her. "You know, most species would never appreciate this. They follow the rules, never question. You're different. You see the possibilities." Lyra tilted her head. "Possibilities. Humans embrace them. Others fear them." "Why?" he shrugged. "Maybe we're built to take chances. Maybe it's how we've survived all this time. We don't always know what will happen, but we try anyway. That's humans." For Lyra, it was a revelation. She had observed countless species during her diplomatic missions, but none had displayed this combination of instinct, courage, and creativity. Humans were not just intelligent, they were unpredictable, adaptive, and endlessly fascinating. Over time, their conversations became longer and more personal. She asked him about his childhood, his training, his experiences in space. He asked her about her species, their culture, and their rules. But always, they returned to the room, to the maps, to the simulations, to the way humans thought. One night, Lyra stood at the window, staring at a distant nebula. Elias joined her silently. The ship hummed around them, a quiet, steady heartbeat. "You'll never leave, will you?" he asked with a smile. Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting the stars outside. "Perhaps not this human perspective. I must understand it fully." Elias nodded. "Well, if you're staying, you might as well learn the hard way." Piloting a ship through uncharted space isn't easy. Lyra's lips curved into what could be considered a smile. Challenge. Accepted. And so an unusual partnership began. One was a human pilot, brilliant and fearless. The other was an alien diplomat, endlessly curious and fascinated by the human mind. Together they would discover that sometimes the greatest strength in the galaxy came not from technology or power, but from the human ability to think differently and to act boldly when no one else would. In that quiet room, amid maps and charts and glowing starlight, Lyra decided that she would stay. She would watch, learn, and perhaps in her own way contribute. The accidental meeting had become intentional, and both knew that their lives were about to change forever. Lyra returned to Elias's room more often now, no longer just out of curiosity, but with a purpose. She had begun to notice patterns in his thinking, ways he solved problems that no other species she had observed could match. The small room with the star maps and scattered schematics had become a laboratory of human ingenuity, and she was eager to witness it in action. Elias was used to her presence by now. He had stopped being surprised when she slipped past security or appeared quietly in the corner, studying his work. Instead, he had started to speak aloud as he worked, as if explaining his decisions to her. See, in space, you don't just follow the instructions. You anticipate. You improvise. Sometimes that's the only way to survive. Lyra tilted her head. Improvise? Anticipation, humans. Uniquely capable. Yes, Elias said, tapping the desk. Other species are cautious. They follow protocols. Humans, we can break them, and still come out ahead. She studied him closely. Break rules, succeed. Why others cannot? Because humans think differently, he explained. We combine logic with instinct. We don't just see what's there, we see what could be. Lyra reached out and traced a line on one of the holographic star maps. And your calculations. Precise but flexible, adaptable. Elias smiled faintly. That's the point. You can't predict everything in space. Hazards, storms, rogue debris. Sometimes rules fail. You have to improvise, trust your mind, trust the ship. The conversation continued late into the night. Lyra found herself fascinated not just by the technical skill of humans, but by the way they approached life. Their creativity was not just an accident, it was survival. Their courage, their ability to take risks when all odds were against them, was remarkable. And Elias, more than any human she had observed, seemed to embody it completely. One evening, as the ship drifted through a quiet sector of space, Lyra asked, "Can humans succeed where others fail?" Elias leaned back in his chair, eyes on the distant stars. Sometimes. If they're willing to think differently, yes. That's what makes humans special. We're adaptable, persistent, unpredictable. That combination, it works. Lyra absorbed this silently. She had observed countless species that relied on strength, numbers, or advanced technology. But humans relied on something else entirely. Their minds, their creativity, their courage to act when others hesitated. The next day, the ship's sensors detected a minor asteroid cluster drifting into their path. It was nothing serious. Most species would navigate around it slowly, carefully, and follow the standard protocols. But Elias stood at the controls, his eyes scanning the readings, and then he smiled. "This is perfect," he said. "A test of sorts." Lyra's eyes widened. "Test human method?" "Yes," he replied. "Watch." He adjusted the ship's course, weaving through the asteroids with a speed and precision that seemed reckless. Lyra's heart, or the closest equivalent her species had, raced. She had never seen anyone pilot like this. Calculations that should have taken minutes were done in seconds, and movements that seemed impossible were completed effortlessly. When they cleared the asteroid field, Lyra could hardly contain her amazement. "Humanoid incredible." Elias shrugged modestly. Just thinking ahead, anticipating, improvising. Lyra studied him. "Other species cannot manage this." "No," Elias agreed. "Most follow the instructions. That's safe. But humans, we make our own path. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But we try anyway." That night, as Lyra returned to his room to analyze the star maps, she realized something. Her initial curiosity had grown into admiration, and admiration had grown into understanding. Humans were not just clever. They were a force of adaptability, and their courage was contagious. Watching Elias work, She had learned more than she ever expected about problem-solving, creativity, and the way human minds saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. "You learn quickly," Elias said suddenly, noticing her intense focus. "I must understand," Lyra replied. "Human thinking. Remarkable. I wish to see more." Elias nodded. "Then stay. Watch. Learn. You'll see things that no simulation can teach." She stayed, silently promising herself that she would. Each day brought new challenges, and each challenge revealed more about human ingenuity. Lyra began to record her observations, comparing them to the rigid methods of other species. Humans were not just intelligent, they were adaptable, bold, and unpredictable. They could succeed where others failed because they could imagine new possibilities and act on them when others hesitated. In the quiet of the ship, with stars drifting past the windows and the hum of the engines surrounding them, an unspoken bond formed. Lyra no longer considered her visits accidental. She was a student of human ingenuity, and Elias unknowingly had become her teacher. As she traced the lines of another star map, she realized that her fascination was more than professional. Humans had something unique, a spark of creativity and courage that no machine, no rule, and no other species could replicate. And she wanted to understand it fully. From that night on, Lyra stayed in the pilot's room not out of curiosity, but out of respect and admiration. The human mind, she realized, was a wonder to study, and she knew that the lessons she learned here might one day change her own species' understanding of intelligence, strategy, and courage. Elias looked at her quietly and smiled, as if he understood what she could not yet put into words. For the first time, Lyra realized that the room she had entered by accident had become a center of discovery, not just of maps or star routes, but of something far greater, the extraordinary power of a human mind. The EOS Vanguard drifted silently through the dark stretch of space, the stars outside the viewport shimmering like scattered diamonds. Elias was at the helm, his hands moving confidently over the controls as he reviewed the flight path ahead. Lyra stood nearby, watching the patterns on the holographic star map, her three eyes reflecting every movement and calculation. Suddenly, the ship's sensors beeped urgently. A rogue asteroid cluster had drifted into their planned route, and the readings showed irregular, fast-moving debris that could damage the hull if not avoided. The warning lights flashed, casting red reflections across the cockpit. Elias's expression remained calm. He leaned forward, scanning the approaching asteroids. "Looks like we've got a test," he said quietly. Lyra tilted her head, her curiosity sharp. "Test human method?" "Yes," Elias replied. "Time to see how humans handle danger differently." Most species would have slowed the ship, recalculated the course with caution, and followed strict safety protocols. But Elias was human. He studied the pattern of the asteroids, predicting their paths with instinct and experience rather than relying solely on simulations. "Watch," he said. The ship surged forward, weaving through the debris at a speed that seemed reckless. Lyra's attention sharpened. Her mind raced as she tracked the calculations unfolding in real time. Each movement of the ship was precise yet daring, a blend of strategy and instinct she had never seen executed so flawlessly. "Impressive," Lyra whispered. "Human. Unpredictable yet perfect." Elias glanced at her and smiled. "Sometimes unpredictability is the advantage. Other species wait for certainty. Humans, we act." Asteroids flew dangerously close, yet Elias anticipated every curve, adjusting the ship's velocity and trajectory instinctively. Lyra realized that what looked like recklessness was actually a complex dance of thought and intuition. Each choice had a purpose. Each movement accounted for risks and possibilities simultaneously. One massive rock loomed directly in their path. Sensors indicated impact in seconds if they did not adjust. Elias didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, he altered the trajectory using an unconventional angle that no standard protocol would suggest. The ship sliced through the asteroid field, narrowly avoiding disaster. Lyra's gaze widened. "Incredible. Human mind. Unmatched." He chuckled softly. "Unmatched, huh? Don't tell anyone. They'll expect perfection every time." For a moment, the cockpit was quiet except for the hum of the engines and the blinking lights. Lyra felt a surge of admiration she could barely describe. Humans weren't just intelligent, they were bold, adaptable, and fearless in ways other species could never imitate. They created solutions where no solution seemed possible. You anticipate, Lyra said slowly. Predict. Adjust. Survive. Unlike others. Exactly, Elias replied. Other species calculate for safety. Humans calculate for opportunity. Sometimes you win big. Sometimes you fail. But if you don't try, you never succeed. Lyra studied him closely. She understood now that human ingenuity was more than cleverness. It was a combination of courage, adaptability, and instinct that turned danger into opportunity. Watching him pilot the ship through the asteroid cluster had taught her more than any lecture or simulation ever could. When the last asteroid passed, the ship's sensors returned to normal. Elias exhaled and leaned back in his chair, wiping a faint sheen of sweat from his brow. Lyra approached, her movements careful and deliberate. Human, exceptional. Your methods surpass others. All species rely on rules. Humans eat rules and break them successfully. He smiled faintly. Well, we have to, don't we? Space doesn't wait for you to read the manual. Lyra nodded slowly, her fascination growing deeper. I'd almost study this. Human thinking, courage, flexibility, all combined. Unique. Elias leaned against the desk, watching her with quiet amusement. You really are obsessed with humans, aren't you? Obsessed? No, she replied carefully. Intrigued, inspired. Your mind, a model of possibility. For the first time, Lyra realized that her presence in his room, and now in his cockpit, was not just about observation. It was about learning, about experiencing human thought in action. Humans could take risks, make split-second decisions, and navigate challenges that would paralyze other species. That combination of daring and intelligence made them unpredictable and, in her eyes, extraordinary. Later, as they reviewed the star maps and recalculated the next course, Elias spoke again. You see, it's not just about the asteroids. It's how you approach everything. Trade routes, negotiations, exploration. It all requires flexibility and courage. Humans excel because we refuse to accept limits. Lyra's gaze lingered on him. Limits. Humans overcome them, others restricted. Elias smiled knowingly. Exactly. And that's why you're here, isn't it? To see what humans can do when no one else expects it. Lyra nodded, a sense of purpose settling over her. She had entered this room by accident, but now she knew why she had stayed. Humans were not only remarkable, they were transformative. They could change outcomes, inspire others, and survive where no one else could. The hum of the EOS Vanguard surrounded them as the ship moved forward through the quiet expanse of space. Lyra and Elias worked side by side, studying, calculating, and learning. And in that small cockpit amid the blinking lights and star charts, Lyra realized that she was witnessing something extraordinary, the true power of the human mind in action. She would not leave. News of the daring asteroid maneuver spread across the ship like a quiet ripple, first in whispers among the crew, then as official reports sent to the Interstellar Council. The EOS Vanguard had completed its mission ahead of schedule, with fuel savings and navigational efficiency far beyond expectations. Elias, as the human pilot, received accolades for the achievement. But no one truly understood why the ship had performed so well. Only Lyra knew the truth, and she smiled quietly to herself. She had studied his every move, memorized his improvisations, and seen firsthand how his human mind approached problems in ways no other species could. Humans were not just clever, they were adaptable, bold, and unpredictable. Where other species relied on rules and repetition, humans created opportunities in the midst of chaos. Lyra walked through the corridors of the ship, observing other crew members. Many spoke in hushed tones about the human pilot's brilliance. How did he know to adjust the course so quickly? One engineer asked. It was almost like he could predict the asteroids before they moved. Another whispered. She listened, careful not to reveal herself. Lyra's mind was full of observations and comparisons. Humans were underestimated by most species, and yet here they were, outperforming expectations simply because they thought differently. She realized then that her mission had changed. It was no longer about studying humans objectively. It was about sharing her knowledge, about showing others the unique potential of their species. Later, she returned to Elias's room, quietly stepping inside as he worked on recalibrating the navigation systems. Your methods, they impress, she said softly, her eyes focused on the holographic charts. Other species Fail to understand. Human thinking. Remarkable. Elias glanced at her with a smile. You really like humans, don't you? Lyra tilted her head. Not liking, understanding, appreciating. Humans. Capable of more than others realize. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. You know, most people never get it. They follow the rules and expect results. Humans, we create our own rules. We adapt, we take chances. That's why we survive. Yes, Lyra said, her tone firm. And succeed. Humans, exceptional. Must be known. Elias raised an eyebrow. Known? Other species need to see human ingenuity, recognize potential, not only rules followers but creators, risk takers, problem solvers, she explained. Elias nodded slowly. He had long suspected that humans were underestimated, but hearing it from an alien diplomat reinforced the truth. Well, maybe it's time the galaxy learns. Not just our skill, but how we think, how we act, how we adapt. The following days were a blur of council meetings and communications. Lyra accompanied the reports, translating her observations into data that emphasized human flexibility, creativity, and courage. She pointed out subtle decisions, split-second improvisations, and intuitive problem-solving that had saved the ship and its crew. The council listened, intrigued. Alien species were accustomed to relying on strict protocols, simulations, and rigid logic. Lyra's reports highlighted something unfamiliar, a species that thrived on adaptability, unpredictability, and instinctual intelligence. Her words painted humans not as reckless or untrained, but as uniquely capable and essential in situations where conventional methods failed. Elias watched quietly from the corner, letting Lyra speak. He understood that she had become more than an observer. She had become an advocate, a translator of human ingenuity to the galaxy at large, and he knew that this recognition, once it spread, could change the way humans were seen forever. By the end of the week, the council made an official statement. Humans were to be considered strategic assets for exploration, negotiation, and crisis resolution. Other species, while advanced, lacked the unpredictability and adaptability that humans demonstrated in situations of uncertainty. Humans had earned respect, not just for their strength or technology, but for their minds. Lyra returned to Elias's room, quietly closing the door behind her. Humans recognized, she said, her voice calm but proud. Your methods, valued across species, your mind, respected. Elias leaned back in his chair, a small smile on his face. I didn't do anything special. I just acted brilliantly, Lyra replied. Other species follow instructions. Humans see opportunity. They achieve more. For a long moment, they both stared at the star maps, the hum of the engines filling the silence. Lyra realized how much she had learned, not only about humans, but about potential, courage, and the value of thinking differently. Humans had succeeded not because they were stronger or faster, but because they dared to act, to adapt, and to imagine solutions where none seemed possible. Elias finally spoke, a quiet confidence in his voice. So now the galaxy knows. Humans aren't just ordinary. We make things happen, and you're the first alien who understood that. Lyra nodded. And I will ensure they continue to understand. Human ingenuity must be protected, appreciated, and celebrated. In that small room, surrounded by holographic maps and glowing stars, an unspoken bond formed between pilot and observer. Lyra had entered the human pilot's room by accident, but she would not leave. Not now, not ever. She had witnessed something extraordinary, the brilliance of the human mind in action, and she had committed herself to ensuring the galaxy recognized it. The EOS Vanguard continued its journey, its engines humming steadily, carrying with it not only crew and cargo, but the knowledge that humans, often underestimated, were capable of remarkable things. And Lyra, quietly observing, felt a sense of purpose she had never known before. Humans were special, and the galaxy was finally beginning to understand why. Lyra had officially joined Elias in the cockpit, though not as a pilot. Her role was different. She was an observer, a student, and in many ways an assistant who could learn from his human perspective and help him make decisions. She stood by the controls, her attention sharp, her eyes moving constantly between the holographic star maps and Elias's actions. Elias glanced at her and smiled. Ready for another challenge? Lyra inclined her head. Always, human methods must be studied fully. Their next assignment was a diplomatic mission to a neighboring system. Political tensions had been rising between two alien species, and the Council requested a neutral observer with a reputation for fairness. Humans were often underestimated in these situations, but Elias and Lyra knew differently. Humans did not rely solely on rules. They adapted, read the room, or in this case, the galaxy, and made decisions that could change outcomes. As they approached the contested system, sensors detected an unexpected meteor storm forming near the primary trade route. Most species would halt their approach, wait for clearance, or request assistance. Elias studied the readings and shook his head. We can't wait. The diplomats are already en route. We'll have to navigate through it. Lyra's eyes widened slightly. Risk high. Human still confident? He nodded. Confidence is not recklessness. We adapt. We think differently. That's how humans succeed. The ship surged forward into the meteor field. Rocks of various sizes spun through space, unpredictable and fast-moving. Lyra held her breath, or the closest her species had to a human reaction, watching as Elias piloted with a combination of intuition and strategy that defied logic. Every adjustment was precise, every decision deliberate, yet flowing with the effortless fluidity that only a human could achieve. You anticipate, predict, Lyra murmured. Incredible. Elias smiled without looking away from the controls. Anticipation and instinct. That's what humans do. Other species calculate for safety. We calculate for opportunity. That's the difference. When they cleared the meteor field, the ship's sensors indicated that fuel consumption had been optimized, damage avoided, and time saved. Lyra's admiration grew with every maneuver. Humans were not just clever, they were extraordinary. They could navigate impossible situations because they dared to act where others hesitated. Once they entered the diplomatic sector, Elias turned to her. Now comes the next test. Not meteor storms, but mines, alien mines. You ready? Lyra nodded. Always. Humans adapt. Influence. In the council chamber of the system's central hub, two alien factions sat tensely across from one another. Protocols were strict, and any misstep could result in escalating conflict. Lyra observed quietly as Elias entered the negotiation. He did not rely on preset arguments or scripted statements. Instead, he listened, asked questions, and read the subtle cues of body language, tone, and hesitation. Lyra realized that human strength was not only in action but in perception. They could sense opportunities where others saw barriers, read intentions where others saw only words, and act decisively when indecision would have paralyzed others. The discussion grew heated. Voices raised and accusations exchanged. Most mediators would have faltered or called for breaks. Elias leaned slightly forward, his expression calm but focused. Let's look at what's possible, he said quietly. Not what's expected. Not what's safe. What works? Lyra's antennae twitched in fascination. Humans could change the flow of events simply by thinking differently, by refusing to follow predictable paths. Slowly, the aliens' tempers cooled. They began to consider compromises they had previously dismissed. Lyra watched in awe as Elias guided the negotiation, step by step using instinct, insight, and human ingenuity. After hours of discussion, an agreement was reached. It was fair, unexpected, and durable. Elias had achieved in one day what months of formal diplomacy had failed to accomplish. Lyra realized that humans were not just creators, improvisers, and risk-takers. They were problem-solvers on a scale that no other species could match. Back in the cockpit, she turned to him. Humans, extraordinary, not only in flight, but in thought, action. Influence, Elias chuckled softly. You make it sound like we're magical. Lyra shook her head. Not magic. Human mind, adaptable, courageous, creative, limitless. He leaned back, smiling. Well, if you're learning that, maybe we should start testing even more impossible scenarios. Humans love that, she nodded eagerly. Yes, observe, learn, understand fully. As the EOS Vanguard departed the diplomatic system, Lyra felt a quiet satisfaction. She had entered the human pilot's room by accident, but now she was part of something greater. She was witnessing human brilliance in action, learning to apply it, and understanding why humans were capable of extraordinary achievements. For the first time, she realized that humans were not just remarkable in one area, they were remarkable in every way that counted. Adaptable, intuitive, courageous, and creative, they could change the course of events, navigate impossible situations, and inspire respect across the galaxy. Elias glanced at her with a small smile. "So, partner, ready for the next adventure?" Lyra's eyes gleamed with determination. Always, human methods must be explored fully, together. And with that, the two continued their journey side by side, proving that the combination of human instinct and alien observation could accomplish feats no one else could even imagine. The EOS Vanguard glided through the quiet emptiness of space, stars stretching endlessly in every direction. Lyra stood at the observation window, her three eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. She had been with Elias through countless maneuvers, diplomatic missions, and improvisational challenges, and now, she realized, their partnership had created something far greater than either of them could have imagined. The reports of human ingenuity had spread beyond the immediate council chambers. Across the galaxy, whispers turned into recognition. Species that had once dismissed humans as reckless or unremarkable were now taking note. Humans were valued not only for their skill with technology or strength, but for their creativity, adaptability, and courage. Lyra had been right. Humans were extraordinary. Elias leaned against the edge of the cockpit, watching the stars. "It's strange," he said quietly. "We didn't try to impress anyone. We just acted." Lyra turned to him, "Acting inhumanly ordinary. But your mind, extraordinary. Galaxy now sees it. Humans, respected." He smiled faintly, his expression thoughtful. "I suppose it's always been there. Humans just never stop trying, never stop imagining. That's what makes us different." Lyra nodded. "Different, special. Other species follow rules. Humans create possibilities, adapt, survive, succeed, not just skill, mind." Their latest mission had been a true test of human innovation. A sudden energy storm had disrupted communications across a cluster of allied systems. Alien ships were stranded, trade routes blocked, and panic had begun to spread. Most species would have waited for the storm to pass, losing days or weeks. Elias and Lyra, however, approached it differently. Using human ingenuity, Elias devised a route through the least dense parts of the storm, anticipating energy fluctuations and calculating risks in ways no protocol could predict. Lyra assisted, observing and analyzing, learning to anticipate his instincts. Together, they guided stranded ships to safety, restored vital communications, and averted potential conflict. When the crisis ended, Lyra turned to him. "Humans change outcomes. Others paralyzed. You save lives. Entire systems. Your mind powerful." Elias shook his head. "It's not just me. It's all humans. We think differently, act boldly, and improvise when necessary. That's our advantage." Lyra realized how right he was. Human strength lay not in weapons or numbers, but in thought, courage, and adaptability. They could navigate impossible situations, inspire confidence, and influence outcomes across vast distances. No other species she had observed could match that combination. The recognition from the Galactic Council was official. Humans were now considered strategic partners for missions of exploration, crisis management, and diplomacy. Lyra herself had become a quiet ambassador for human ingenuity, ensuring that their capabilities were understood and respected. She had entered Elias's room by accident, but her presence had become vital. She had witnessed the human mind at work and knew that the galaxy needed to understand it. One evening, as the ship drifted near a luminous nebula, Lyra and Elias stood together at the observation window. The colors of the gas clouds painted the room in soft shades of pink and gold. For a moment there was silence, filled only by the gentle hum of the engines. "You've changed," Elias said finally, breaking the quiet. "From observer to advocate, you see humans in ways others never will." Lyra's antennae twitched. Human mind must be known, appreciated. Potential, limitless." He nodded. "It's not just about understanding. It's about belief. Believing that humans can accomplish more than anyone expects, and now the galaxy will believe it too." Lyra studied him carefully. "You extraordinary, not only pilot, but symbol. Others follow example." Elias laughed softly. "I'm just one human. But maybe one is enough to show what humans can do. The nebula shimmered outside, reflecting the vast possibilities of the universe. Lyra realized that their journey together had begun with an accident, a simple curiosity that led her to enter his room. But staying, learning, and observing had transformed her understanding, and perhaps the galaxy's understanding of humanity itself. Humans were special. They could adapt, create, and inspire in ways no other species could. They could act when others hesitated, imagine when others doubted, and solve problems that seemed impossible. They were more than clever. They were extraordinary. Lyra turned to Elias with a soft certainty in her voice. "Kids will stay. Human methods must continue to be studied. Understood, applied. Humans' legacy must grow." Elias smiled, a quiet pride in his eyes. "Then we keep going. One challenge at a time, one discovery at a time. Humans have a lot to show, and I guess we're just getting started." Together they looked out at the stars, the endless expanse of space stretching before them. The EOS Vanguard carried them forward, a symbol of human ingenuity, courage, and potential. And Lyra, standing beside the human pilot, knew that the galaxy had only just begun to understand what humans were truly capable of. For the first time, she felt certain, humans would leave a mark that no one could ignore. They would inspire, challenge, and transform the cosmos, and she would be there to witness it all. The journey of discovery, courage, and brilliance was far from over. But one thing was clear: humans were extraordinary, and the universe would never forget it.